I'm Edward Hunda from the Atlanta chapter, and I'm here with Pat McCabe, past president, 2001. We want to talk about his experiences since he started with ASHRAE. Pat, can you give us a brief biography of yourself?
Of my involvement with ASHRAE?
Yeah.
I was finally joined ASHRAE in 1985 because although I'd been asked repeatedly in previous years to join ASHRAE, and I always thought I couldn't really find, see what benefit it was to me, sort of thing, and plus I didn't want to pay the money.
Right.
And finally, Ben Leopard, I'm sure you know Ben Leopard.
Yes.
He's been an old friend of mine since the 70s, and he came into my office one day when I was still with Jones Norland Davis at the time. He called me and asked me if he could come by and see me, and he was still an equipment rep in those days. And he came by, and I just assumed it was to talk about the equipment that he was representing and various other bits and pieces. We'd used to go out and have lunch. And when we got back, he got all his paperwork out in front of us. So he says, "Now Pat," he said, "just so I'll let you know, sort of thing," he said, "there was an ulterior motive for us going out to lunch today. These are the forms for ASHRAE that you need to fill out, and I'm not leaving your damn office until you fill them out." So
Kind of twisted your arm, huh?
Twisted my arm. So that's how I got involved in it. That was how I became a member of ASHRAE in 1985. Then, subsequent to that, I found it very difficult to get to the ASHRAE meetings because I had another outside commitment with some friends, and we always used to meet on Tuesday night every week. And so that overrode why I never came to the ASHRAE meetings for the first few years. And then one day I was, I think it was the year before Ben became president of ASHRAE, the ASHRAE chapter. He just called me up one day, sort of thing. He said, "Are you still meeting with your friends on a Tuesday night?" And I said, "No, as a matter of fact, we changed it a few months ago. We're now doing it on a Wednesday." And he said, "Well, that means you can come to ASHRAE." So that's what started me coming to ASHRAE. And of course, I walked in there and I knew just about everybody that was in the room that day. And I'm trying to think of his name now off the top of my head. He used to be the rep for BAC, Baltimore Air Coil. I'd been coming to the meetings for about 6 months or so, and after a meeting one day, we would just one of the meetings, we were just standing there talking about odds and ends and one thing and another like that. He said, "Pat," he said, "I'm on the nominating committee for chapter officers and various other bits and pieces." He said, "We need you on the board of governors." He said, "We need someone with your background and experience," he said, "to help some of these younger guys get going." And he said, "Now, I'm actually breaking the mold here, sort of thing, because the way we used to do it, or the way it actually says you do it, what you do is you get people involved in the chapter committees
At first, yeah.
at first, and then they become the chair of the chapter committee, sort of thing, and then we move them over to the board of governors to sort of see how things run, sort of thing, and then they'll eventually run up through the offices." He said, "So but he said, with your background," he said, "we'd like to skip the chair stuff. We don't want to lose you. We'd rather use you." So I was invited to go on the board of governors, and I thought, well, very first CLC that came up, I went to that, and I was on the board of governors for 3 years. Then I became the secretary, treasurer, vice president, or president-elect, and then president.
And that was in 2001?
And that was in 2001. And never forget the very first chapter meeting under my presidency. was Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001. And everybody was in a state of shock. And I was getting phone calls. My phone just started ringing off the hook. What you gonna do, Pat? What you gonna do? You gonna cancel? I said, there's no way I'm getting out to the field and say it's cancelled. Don't come, sort of thing. Because I can guarantee there'll be a bunch of people who won't get the message and they'll come to the meeting place and get really honked off because they've wasted their time and travel. I said, so we're going to go with it. And these are the days when we used to have about an average of 65 to 75 members at each meeting, and they were always in the evenings. And so I just said, just let it stand as it is, and I'll be there, whatever. And I called my 3 other officers, and they said they'd all be there. And 48 people showed up that night.
Yeah, that was quite a bit there.
It was, and so once we got started, once we got together, I started the meeting off, because we used to meet in a hotel, and we'd always have like a happy hour, 30 minutes, to have a drink, just get acquainted sort of thing while they set the room up. First thing I did is when I introduced myself, as I referenced what had happened in New York and Washington DC, and I said, let's start with a prayer and a moment and a minute of silence. And that's what I did. And really interesting, at the end of the meeting, how many people came up to me, Tom Barrow and loads of other guys, that, and said to me, Pat, we are so glad that you went ahead with the meeting, sort of thing. He said, because I can't use the language, he said, because Tom very rarely swore, cussed. But he said, basically, I'll be damned if we're going to cancel our meetings just because of some rebel rousers, in another country doing, even though all these people died. At that time, they were still talking about casualties in the 10,000 range. And of course, it whittled down gradually. I think the final total was, 3,000 something. Yeah. But then I received a load of emails too, and that was up to 2001, and from then on, I guess I became past president, and by then I assumed I was already on the ways. I was already the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and I did that. And then I took on the audit, and I've been chair of the Ways and Means Committee ever since, and I've also been chair of the Audit Committee ever since. And then I went back on and I was off the Board of Governors for about 2 or 3 years, and then I think when John McFarlane was the president, he asked me if I would come, if I would be prepared to come back on the Board of Governors, and I've been on the Board of Governors ever since. And I'll probably do a couple more years. I don't know, just see how I feel. And guess I'm suddenly realising I'm starting to feel my age a little bit now all of a sudden.
We're not going to ask what that is, but
well, I was born before the Second World War, so that gives you a clue.
So tell me, when you were a young man, what attracted you to the engineering or the HVAC industry?
Well, when I was in school, I went to primary school like everybody else, but the education system in England, because I was born in England in 1938, and the education system back in those days was radically different from what it is now. When everybody went to primary school until they were 11 years old, from the age of 5, and prior to my 11th birthday, my final year in primary school, I took what they called the matriculation examination, which actually, what that was an exam that everybody that was fairly well. Well, actually, everybody could take it, and if you passed, and it was it was a real difficult thing to pass, sort of thing. If you passed your matriculation, as they called it, you were given a scholarship to go on to what they call grammar schools, which is not the same thing as what you call grammar schools over here. But basically what it was is it separated you from the normal stream of kids that would go on to a secondary modern school, and it would put you in a special stream of higher education where you would learn languages and instead of just straight maths, you did algebra and geometry and all sorts of other history, religion, you just name it. But the idea was you did 5 years of that education, and if you passed that, what they call the ordinary level, you went on to the advanced level, because that would take you up to 16, whereas the normal children would leave school at 15. But then you would stay up for 2 more years and doing the advanced courses, and then you would go on to university. I'm talking about Cambridge, Oxford, University sort of thing. So coming from a working class background, that was a real good step up in life sort of thing. Only I screwed it up.
Oh, what happened?
I did something, well, you'd call it stupid now sort of thing, but basically what I did is we were playing around in the class one lunchtime because the school was right in the centre of London, right up in Regent Street, in Oxford Circus, and we had nowhere to go for education except to go down into the gym, play basketball, stuff like that. We actually used to play basketball, which was unusual in England in those days. And we were having a group of us got together sort of thing, and we'd get each one would be at the top end of the classroom, and the others, 3 or 4 of us would be at the back end, and we'd be throwing board dusters at one another, trying to, just trying to have our
horsing around,
yeah. And I let fly a guy that was running across towards the door to the classroom, and the classroom door opened, and this board duster hit the assistant headmaster right in the head.
Ooh.
And it didn't go down very well. I ended up getting caned. Corporal punishment still existed in those days. And I also got thrown out of school, expelled.
Oh, no.
So that kind of screwed things up a bit. Don't know what started that off, but anyway, that was. Now, how did I get involved in the HVAC?
Did you continue your technical?
No, because of getting thrown out of school, and also, unfortunately, I had contacted chicken pox.
Oh.
Only I didn't. I was a carrier. I actually got it, but I didn't know I'd got it. But I gave it to everybody else. So I missed several of my exams, and I couldn't retake them. So I didn't pass I didn't get sufficient results so that I could start taking on the advanced classes. Plus I've been expelled from the school anyway, so that kind of screwed things up. So the only thing to do was go to work, and based on my education. Now the teacher that used to teach mechanical drawing was taken with me for some reason or other, and he asked me one day in the final year, before I knew it was my final year there, what was I planning on doing when I left school? And I said I hadn't got a clue. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And he said to me, he said, well, your mechanical drawing, he said, the ability you have in laying things out and doing, God, I don't know what you call it now, sort of thing, when you can lay it, you set everything up on an angle, different angles and all the rest of it. He said, you might think about doing engineering. He He said, because you're a natural. And so I ended up getting a job when I was 17 years old, working for a radiant heating company.
I see.
They did radiant heating systems, and the man used to the guy that used to sell these systems to these. This was all industrial. The other things we used to do as well was we used to design crematorium ovens for children, for animals.
Oh.
And but they always used to bring all these radiant heating systems to me, and I used to work out, what based on the size of the building, I'd work out what type of radiant heaters they'd need, what height they were mounted at. I would lay out all the piping and size it all, and I was doing that within 6 minutes of joining the company, and that attracted the attention of one of the managing directors of the company. And he took me aside one day, or he asked to come, he wanted to see me, and I went down to his office and he talked to me about general things, about what I was interested in. And then another meeting, he said to me, I want you to think about it and talk to your parents about this. He said, but what I would like to do is take you out of the drawing office in the mornings and put you down on the shop floor and work with the head of the engineering group down there, so that you can understand the manufacturing side of what we do. And then in the afternoons you work in the drawing office doing what you do. But also what I want you to do is I want you to enroll in technical school. So you can go ahead and get a mechanical engineering degree, and we'll pay all the costs.
Oh, great. How old were you then?
I was coming out on 18 when that happened, and that caused quite because he told me to keep quiet about it.
Yes.
But eventually it got out, and it really bent a lot of people out of shape, sort of thing, because they'd never done it with anybody else, but they did it for me. And that worked out pretty well, because I started going to Harrow Technical College, which was quite close to where I lived, it was on a Thursday. And I did my first year. Then I transferred then to Hendon Technical College, which is now called Middlesex Technical College, which was also about, within 4 or 5 miles of my house. And I did my second and third years there. And then by then I was engaged, and Vera got real sick.
Oh.
And she was in hospital for 6 months before they finally operated on her. And my father got sick too with cancer, so he was in the surgical ward and she was in the medical ward. And I spent most of my evenings and weekends visiting them both in hospital. So I had to take it again. And then by then they'd operated on Vera, and we'd postponed our marriage, and so we didn't get married until March of '61. And but before that, I'd gone ahead and signed up, because I'd failed that year. The company would no longer pay for me to go to day school.
Right.
So I had to change and go to night school 3 nights a week to redo that year. And I went ahead and paid all the fees and everything else like that. And then I got to thinking about it after I'd done that. I was getting married in March, and the finals were going to be in May. And I thought to myself, that ain't going to work. So I didn't take that final year.
I see.
I just postponed it because I couldn't get my fees back. There was no return of fees or anything in those days. And got married, moved out to a little village called Hadman, which was about 40 miles north of London. And I think think it was about 1960. I'd taken my third year in 1960. Stephen was born in 64, so it must have been 65. I decided I need to go back to college, and by then I was working in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, about 7 miles from my home, and then the college was actually on the way home to my house, only about a mile from where I worked. So I went to the college to sign up to redo this final year. Only the Association of Mechanical Engineers had changed the rules, moved the goalposts, and they said that before you take your final year, you now have to take a bunch of electives, and you have to take them first before you can take your final year. So instead of going back to college for 1 year, I had to go back to college for 2 years.
Oh.
And if I was going to do it,
yeah.
And I was still very arrogant in those days. And I thought, screw them, I don't know this, I'm not having any trouble getting work. I was changing my jobs every couple of years or so, you know, and moving up the ranks, and I was getting pretty well paid. I decided I don't need it. So that's about it there. Now, changing tactics slightly. Well, go ahead, ask me a question.
So when did you move to the United States?
1967. I need to back up a little bit. You know, I went to work for this company, which was actually did radiant heating systems, and it was actually called, the name of the company was called Radiant Heating Limited. And after I'd been there 2 years, I decided that I was getting. The company had been bought out by another company, and the managing director that was mentoring me, if you like, he moved all the way up to the north of England to manage the consolidated company. And the person that took his place was the person that actually originally hired me. And somehow or other, we got cross wires, and all of a sudden I found I had a enemy in the ranks, if you like. Didn't matter what I did, I was always in trouble. So I decided to look for another job, and I found another job, but it wasn't did anything to do with heating and ventilation. It was a subset, if you like, of the aerospace industry. Basically what I was doing is I was designing AC and DC motors and gearboxes for missile systems. And so after 2.5 years at Radiant Heating, I went to work for ASHRAE, and I worked for there for 2.5 years. So that brings me up to, I started working in 1950, so it was in 1960, and by then I was engaged to Vera, and I'd cross swords with I used to do this a lot. I'd cross swords with my boss at ASHRAE by then. I was always in his bad books about one thing or another. And I decided I needed to look for another job, and I found a job quite close to where I lived at the time, and that was in the aerospace industry. That's how I got into, I went to work for a company called ASHRAE that made the Lancaster bomber during the Second World War. And then it was also a period of consolidation during that time, because ASHRAE was bought by August Siddeley. They'd already bought Armstrong, and then further consolidation happened, so they ended up just being, everything was all called British Aerospace. And I went to work for them, and I progressed up through the ranks pretty quickly there until I became a senior design engineer. And I worked there for just over 4 years, and then they decided to close the London office down and move to Chatterton, or Woodford, which is near Manchester. And I got a job near me in Aylesbury for a company called General Precision that made simulators for aircraft. And I started designing these small electromechanical systems for simulators. especially for the camera latching system, which now they do it all electronically, but in those days you used to have this camera on a swing, and it used to come down over a model of the airfield, and if it got down too close to the runway, so that it wasn't going to touch down right sort of thing, what it would do, it would trigger a release and the camera would swing back out of the way, so it didn't damage the sensor on the front of the thing, which was a little tiny camera. I mean small, about as big as this. Talk about miniaturization. And I worked there for 2 years, and then I worked for General Precision for 2 years, and I decided to change jobs again. I got a job over in Dunstable, which was about 20 miles away from where I live, with AC Delco. You've heard of them, they're part of General Motors.
Yes.
And I was designing windshield wiper systems, and made quite a name for myself because I saved a lot of money in the design of it was when they first started doing intermittent wipers, and so I made quite a name for myself because I saved so much money on when I redesigned the way the system worked. One of the things about when I went to work for this company is there had been a lot of problems in the industry back in England, where people were saying that my model railway out again, which I haven't done anything with for years. So
Okay.
that's it. What else would you want to know, talk about?
Well, I think we're probably about out of time. So we have a good portion here that we can pass on to
Well, you can.
further other generations.
I can tell you what, I can fill in a couple of things. I was born in Edgeworth, Middlesex.
Well, okay, that was the start of the interview, so go ahead and tell us about it.
Yeah. I was born in Edgeworth, Middlesex in July of 1938, and that's about 10 miles northwest of the centre of London. And I have a younger brother, 2 years younger than me. Then I have what I call a three-quarter brother.
All right.
Because three of us had the same father, but there's two different mothers.
Uh-huh.
But the mothers were sisters.
Oh, okay.
My father's first wife died of cancer,
Uh-huh.
and my mother looked after her until she died. And then they married in 36. I was born in 38, and my younger brother was born in 40. But my older brother, who's 14 and a half years older than me, he just turned 90 in January.
Uh-huh.
And he's got dementia now, and he doesn't know me or anything. He doesn't even know his daughter now.
Mm-hmm.
And my father died he died on my first wedding anniversary in 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, she lived with us initially when we were in Padnam, and then she moved in with her youngest sister, who at the age of 70 decided to get married and threw my mother out basically and told my mother she had to find somewhere else to live, so she went into a nursing home until she died just before her 93rd birthday in 1990. My current family, I've got wife Vera that were married in 61, and we've got three sons: Stephen, who was born in 64, the twins David and Paul, who were born in 69,
Mm-hmm.
and Peter, who was born in 75 and he's 39 now, or will be. And they have they all have wives. Stephen's got Sandy, and currently they live in Houston. David lives in Peachtree City and with Gina, and our grandson, Carter, who's just turned 11. And then Paul is a priest now, and he's married to 80, and they have our granddaughter, Kendall.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter is married to Kathy, and they don't want any children. Now, you may know Kathy. I know Tony and several of the other guys here do, because Kathy is a registered civil engineer, and she used to work for PBS&J, but is now part of Atkins.
Oh, I see.
And she was responsible for all the civil engineering at CDC. So when we were doing all that work out at CDC, we used to interface quite a lot. And of course, she still meets them at various meetings, you know, project meetings every now and again. But she and Tony know one another quite well.
Okay.
And Peter is a senior vice president at Trust Company Bank. St. Paul is a priest. David is a medical instruments sales for Smith Company, which is an English company as well. And Stephen is currently is unemployed, but was director of transportation for Nexio Solutions, and he was responsible for the UK, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. But right now he's real high salary. So he's at interviewing for jobs sort of thing, but you know, they're few and far between.
Well, all right. That's
Bored you to death?
Well, thank you very much.